us here, we can see the oldest, one of the oldest civilizations in the world, the tell of Jericho with the Mount of Temptation, as we have already heard in the background. This was the first point of conquest in the Promised Land. And I want to back up just a bit before we talk about Jericho, because I think it's very, very strategic that we understand God's commissioning to Joshua. And therefore, let's get the context by going to Joshua chapter 1 before we go to 6, where it talks about the conquest. It says that after Moses, the servant of the Lord, died, God then said to Joshua that he wanted him to prepare the people to cross over the Jordan. Now, the significant part for me is God's promise, because Joshua is trying to fill the shoes, really, of a man that's shoes are impossible to fill. I mean, Moses is unique in the history of Israel. He was the one that was the Messiah, as it were, for the people, leading them out of Egyptian bondage. And now Moses is dead. He has not been allowed to cross. He was buried by God on Mount Nebo behind us. And you can imagine the incredible sense of inadequacy and insecurity that Joshua had. Now, what did God say to him? As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Now, isn't that a wonderful promise? God said, just as I was faithful to Moses, I'm going to be faithful to you. And that's also wonderful for us to know that God didn't just say that to Joshua, but he says, as I was faithful to Moses and Joshua, I will be faithful to you and to you and to you and to you. So I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Does that sound interesting? You know, the book of Hebrews talks about that, where God said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Now listen to the commission. There was a promise that God made, and then we have this commission. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. And then he repeats it again. Why? Because Joshua, just like you and me, we oftentimes don't hear the message the first time, and God has to repeat it. So he says again, be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all of the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may be successful wherever you go. Now, that's one of the several places in the Bible where God promises success and where God promises prosperity. What is it based on? Obedience to Tanakh. When we stood at Ebal and Gerizim, we saw that God placed two hands out, as it were, and said, I will bless you if you obey me. I will curse you if you disobey me. And so he says, if you will not turn to the right or to the left, then you will be successful wherever you go. Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it, and we have talked about that, day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So how do we find strength? How do we find courage? Not in our own strength, but in the Word of God. And I think that's one of the reasons that so many Christians have less boldness and a great deal of timidity and fear in their lives, because they are living not by faith in God's Word, they're living in the flesh. And here Joshua was faced with a tremendous situation. It was overwhelming to the flesh. And so God had to assure him, I will be with you just as I was with Moses. And if you want to be successful and prosperous, then you take this book of the law that I gave to Moses, and you do not deviate to the right or to the left, but you meditate on it day and night, being careful to do it, and then whatsoever you do, it will prosper. Now, to me, you cannot separate that promise and that commission from the Lord from what we're seeing back here. Because if Joshua would have tried to go up and take this fortified city in his own strength, obviously he would have failed. Now, on the basis of that, let's read the story in Joshua chapter 6, and then we will go visit the area. I'm reading Joshua chapter 6. Now Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. I mean, the people had already begun to hear about them. So they had fortified the city, they had closed the doors, they had pulled up the gates, they had put the watchmen on the wall. It was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out, no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men." Now, you know, that's an amazing thing because nothing had happened yet, and yet God says to him, "I've already delivered it into your hand. March around the city once with all of the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carrying trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark." Now, what was leading the parade? It wasn't Joshua. It was the ark representing God. The battle is not yours. The battle is the Lord's. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have all of the people give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the people will go up, every man straight in. So Joshua son of Nun called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it." And he ordered the people, "Advance, march around the city with armed guards going ahead of the ark of the Lord." When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing the trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priest who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All of this time the trumpets were sounding, but Joshua had commanded the people, "Do not give a war cry. Do not raise your voice. Do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout." And when that time came, they did. So he and the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circled it once. Then the people returned to camp and spent the night there. Now, this is really the first example of psychological warfare. I mean, you can imagine the people shut up inside, seeing these crazy people come and march around with carrying an ark and all of this procession. Absolutely something foreign. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went before them, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once, returned to their camp, and did this for 6 days. Now you can imagine, things on the inside are probably getting a little unnerving. I mean, what are these people up to? We've never fought a battle like this. We don't know how to deal with people who are doing this. Well, they're really probably getting quite afraid. On the 7th day, now what have we seen before? 7 is a number of completion. It's the number of finality. It's a number, therefore, associated oftentimes with God and His doings. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak, marched around the city 7 times, and in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priests sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the people to shout, "For the Lord has given you this city." The city and all that it is in it are devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who ate with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies that were sent in. But keep away from the devoted things, so that they will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of the Israelites liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All of the silver and the gold and the articles of the bronze and the irons and the sacred things must be to the Lord's treasury. When the trumpet sounded, the people shouted, and at the shout of the trumpets and the people, when they gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed, so that every man charged straight in. They took the city, they devoted the city to the Lord, and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men, women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. And then, just jumping quickly to the end of that chapter, there's one interesting thing. After the Bible said that they had burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and the gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. And then at that time, verse 26, Joshua pronounced a solemn oath. Cursed before the Lord is the man who undertakes to rebuild the city of Jericho. And of course, it still right now lies in ruins. And here's the prophecy. At the cost of his firstborn son will he lay its foundation. At the cost of his youngest he will set up its gates. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. Now, I'm not going to take time to read the whole story, but a prophecy was given against the city, and that prophecy is also read about in 1 Kings chapter 16. It was in the time of Ahab, and it said that in Ahab's time, Hiel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho. He laid its foundations at the cost of his firstborn son. He set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, in accordance with the word of the Lord spoken by Joshua the son of Nun. And so this is a very, very important historic city, biblical city, and a city that obviously has great prophetic significance, because a mathematician did a scientific law of probability study and said that the chances that what Joshua had prophesied, that no one would ever build this city again, and that it would take place just as was said, would be 1 in 10 to the 7th power, which is 10 followed by 7 zeros. You mathematicians can handle that. But anyway, the bottom line is it's a very, very significant city, and it's the city where God, first of all, demonstrated his authority and his adequacy to Joshua, and confirmed Joshua's leadership, and as a result of that struck fear into the people's hearts.